Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and welcome to today's Grassroots conference call with the CCAN Action Fund and the Virginia Sierra Club about the Virginia Clean Economy Act. My name is Stacy Miller, and I'm the Digital Campaigns Coordinator at CCAN. I want to update you on a few housekeeping items before turning the call over to our speakers. First off, today's call is being recorded. We can make a recording available to you at your request. Second, after hearing from our speakers, we will open the call up to your questions. You may email your question in at any time during this call. To do so, email your question to info@ccanactionfund.org. Again, that's info@ccanactionfund.org. Thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to CCAN's Director, Mike Tidwell.
Thank you, Stacy, and welcome everyone to this statewide call about the Virginia Clean Economy Act. Again, I'm Mike Tidwell, Executive Director of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network and CCAN Action Fund. And we are really excited about this call. We have folks from all over the state on the call tonight, from Hampton Roads to Nova, to the Valley, to Richmond, and Southwest, and everywhere in between. And we're really excited to be here to discuss by far the strongest climate and clean energy bill ever to have the prospect of final passage in the Virginia General Assembly. Last week, both the House and Senate passed strong versions of the Clean Economy Act, and now the bill must be reconciled with the opposite chamber and sent to the governor. As you'll hear from our speakers in a moment, this bill would effectively shut down all of Dominion's coal-fired power plants in Virginia by the year 2030 and all the state's utility-owned gas plants no later than 2045 in the House-passed version of the bill. The bill mandates that at least 40% of the state's non-nuclear grid come from renewable electricity by 2030 and 100% by 2050. And that puts Virginia in the ballpark of states like California and Maryland. It also commits $500 million in energy efficiency investments in low-income households by 2030. In a moment, you'll hear from our featured call speakers and supporters of the bill, including Delegate Rip Sullivan, who is Democratic House Caucus Chair and Vice Chair of the Labor and Commerce Committee. He is also Chief Patron of the Clean Economy Act. Then we'll hear from Bob Shippy, Legislative Chair of the Virginia Chapter of the Sierra Club, and Harrison Wallace, who is Virginia State Director of CCAN and CCAN Action Fund. Other supporters of this bill are just too many to name here, but they include the Virginia League of Conservation Voters, Southern Environmental Law Center, the Virginia Energy Efficiency Council, and virtually every state-based and regional wind and solar power company operating in Virginia. The bill has also been endorsed by the progressive website Blue Virginia. Again, both House and Senate chambers passed the Virginia Clean Economy Act last week, with the House version, House Bill 1526, having stronger features that are supported by Sierra and CCAN and the governor's office and other supporters over the still strong Senate version, Senate Bill 851. The House features include a robust energy efficiency goal that Dominion must meet by 2025. Supporters hope to get the stronger House version to the governor's desk by early March, which he has said he wants to sign. Before I introduce our first speaker, I also want to tell you again what Stacy mentioned earlier, and that is we want to hear from you. If you have a question for any of our speakers, please email your questions to info@ccanactionfund.org. That's info@ccanactionfund.org. And I just want to check, Delegate Sullivan, are you on the call?
I'm here, Mike.
Oh, fantastic. Well, you just heard the voice, so I'll tell you a little bit about the delegate. It's my honor to introduce him as our first speaker tonight. Delegate Rip Sullivan represents the 48th District in Northern Virginia. Delegate Sullivan has served in the Virginia House since 2014 and has been a leading advocate for climate action, especially around the vital issue of energy efficiency. Again, he now serves as House Caucus Leader and is Chief Patron of the Clean Economy Act. Delegate Sullivan.
Well, thank you, Mike, and good evening, everybody. It is a great pleasure to be here chatting with you folks. Mike said I've been working on these issues since I got into the General Assembly, and that is true. I have to say there's a big difference working from the majority rather than the minority. I tell this story all the time. When I first got to the General Assembly and started talking about energy efficiency, and over the years I've sort of established myself as the General Assembly's sort of energy efficiency nerd. But in any event, I was appearing in front of what's called the Energy Subcommittee, and at the time it was being chaired by Delegate Kilgore from the 1st District, and I had a bill for an EERS, and I got up and I barely opened my mouth before Delegate Kilgore looked at me and said, "Delegate Sullivan, tell me why Dominion should be worried about whether the Kilgore children turn their lights out at night." And I knew I was in for a very long hearing, and it didn't go particularly well. But I have to say that even from the minority side, over the course of the last 6 or 7 years, finally we're getting traction, frankly, from both sides of the aisle, particularly on energy efficiency and sort of the realization that it is the fastest, cheapest way for us to reduce our carbon output, our carbon footprint. And one of the things I'm most excited about with the Clean Economy Act is a really strong EERS. Everyone knows right now we've made some progress on energy efficiency in Virginia, but we're way behind everybody else, and we don't have a mandatory program. The EERS that's in the House bill, and I expect we're going to be able to get into the Senate bill, is very aggressive and would launch Virginia from the back of the pack up toward the front of the pack in terms of energy efficiency efforts. And frankly, the same is true for much of the rest of the bill. It also has a mandatory RPS in it, which again is going to sort of ignite Virginia's solar and other renewable industries. Everyone knows we're sort of lagging behind not just our neighbors, but states all around the country. And this bill will launch us, toward the front. I've been using words like transformative and frankly even historic to describe the VCEA, and I don't think that's hyperbole. It's not a perfect bill, and since I got to the General Assembly, I've yet to see the perfect bill. But frankly, because of a lot of people's hard work, both in the elections last year, frankly, particularly because of the elections last year, but also leading up to this session, the group of people that have been working with me and Senator McClellan, who's the chief patron over on the Senate side, have just been working tirelessly to craft this piece of legislation. And those who've been resistant to these sorts of things in the past, and not to put too fine a point on it, but I'm talking, of course, about Dominion, realize that it's a new world given what happened in last year's elections. I know there are a lot of people on the phone to whom I owe a great debt of gratitude for their hard work last November to get us this Democratic majority both in the House and the Senate, and that has changed the game. And Dominion is going to have to swallow some things that it never dreamed it would have to swallow, and we're making real progress. So I'll finish with this. I don't know how much time we have, Mike, but I can say to the people on the phone, literally the next 3 or 4 or 5 days are going to be will set the fate of the VCEA. The bill keeps changing, and I know that some people in the environmental movement find that frustrating. But sometimes, that's just sort of the way things work here in Richmond. The bill keeps changing, but I think it keeps changing for the better. But I will be in front of the Senate Labor and Commerce Committee, I think, as early as Monday, with what will have to be probably the final version of the bill, or at least close to it. And then the House will be considering the Senate's version, maybe as early as Tuesday, but certainly no later than Thursday. So literally the next several days in Richmond are going to be crucial. So to the extent this is an opportunity for me to ask for yet again ask for more help. Get on your phones, send your emails, activate your networks, because this bill, the future of the VCEA will be decided quite literally over the next several days here in Richmond. And I think we've got a great opportunity to do something that frankly, just a year ago, we couldn't have dreamed of doing here in Virginia. I'm very excited about it, and let me just end with one more thank you to everyone on the phone, because I know that this has become a real statewide, if not even a national effort. We're hearing people all over the country are excited about what Virginia might be able to do finally. Virginia's just been so far behind, and to be able to be on the cusp of success with a bill that's gonna, it's an omnibus bill, which both makes it very exciting, but also a real challenge, because it has the potential to do so much. But between the mandatory ERS and mandatory RPS, obviously offshore wind, and the bill has lots and lots of consumer protections built into it, and a real focus on issues having to do with environmental justice. We all recognize that as we move away from a carbon-based economy, we have to keep in mind neighborhoods and populations that that have suffered in the past, and that will need some help during this transition time. And the bill has a lot of that built into it too. So we've taken on a big task. It's a heavy lift, but it's just remarkable to see the progress we've made. And I am grateful to everyone on the phone for their interest and for what I know has been a great effort in terms of organizing and mobilizing constituents, talking to members, because I get a lot of members walking up to me telling me they've heard from constituents in support of the bill. So I'll stop talking, Mike. I'm happy to take questions or listen to your next speakers.
Well, Delegate Rip Sullivan, first of all, thank you. Thank you for being chief patron of the Clean Economy Act and for serving as chair of the House Labor and Commerce Committee. If you are able to stick around, we are going to hand it off to Bob Shippy of Sierra Club next, and then Harrison, and then open it up to questions. If you're able to stick around, that would be wonderful.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Fantastic. So we'll turn next to our next speaker, Bob Shippy. Bob is legislative chair of the Virginia chapter of the Sierra Club, and he will speak to us for a few moments on how we got to this moment in Virginia clean energy politics and the role that grassroots activists, like many of you on this call, have played, and that Delegate Rip Sullivan also referred to. Bob?
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thank you, Delegate Sullivan. You're a tough act to follow. A lot of the points that I want to emphasize you've touched on, but I'll try to amplify them without being repetitive. I am a volunteer leader here with the Virginia chapter of Sierra Club on the political committee side as well as the legislative side, but I'll speak to that in a minute. Like probably everybody on this call, I'm in this to help move the Commonwealth forward to a cleaner energy. And, I've probably been in various protests with many of you over the years. I know I have with Harrison and Mike, and been pretty involved in the General Assembly efforts of the chapter, along with Karina Bell and others in the chapter. And I really have to say that where we stand right now in the GA does show the power of grassroots actions, both in the political and the legislative arenas. So, Delegate Sullivan mentioned the election. Getting a new majority in both chambers cannot be understated here. That really has enabled us to have conversations that, if we had them at all in the past, were kind of futile, and they might be embodied in the message or start a conversation, that kind of thing. Whereas now we're actually putting forward that have a good chance to pass, and that's a very different feeling, and it's a complete shift in power in the building as well, in terms of progressive ideas having a chance, and frankly, and I'll talk more about this in a minute, but frankly putting Dominion on their heels in many regards. I would say that, and by the way, that's a very good feeling, because that's that's the opposite of how every other session has gone, where I can never remember the utilities coming in kind of on their heels. The only moment that I can recall was in 2018, and I know Delegate Sullivan remembers this, with the Grid Transformation Act, which many of us had mixed feelings about, but the worst element of that bill was sort of the double dip effect, where Dominion was able to collect twice on certain investments. And with grassroots upswell of calls and emails and in-person visits, we were able to defeat that piece of that bill. And that was a victory, and I did see the look in the Dominion lobbyists' eyes then that I now see pretty regularly in the building. So I wanted to mention that. But Clean Economy Act is probably the best example of this power shift that I can cite of any of the bills that we've been working on this session. It kind of started late last summer is when I became aware of some of the clean economy companies, the advanced energy economy group largely, but also joined quickly by some of the solar installers and so on. I know that the Southern Environmental Law Center got involved fairly early in the game, because they have the attorneys that have the expertise to really make sure the legislation is smartly drafted. And soon after that, I know Sierra Club and CCAN and others joined the conversations. And this was all before the election. So we were hopeful that we could propose an omnibus bill like this. But frankly, it was aspirational at that point. Then the election happened, and our aspirations became real in a sense, that we were able to pull this bill together and actually get it filed with the delegates' help, and of course Senator McClellan, as we just mentioned. I think you probably know the basics of the bill, but and Harrison will go into this in more detail later. But you've got these four large pillars that make it up: the mandatory RPS that Delegate Sullivan mentioned, the mandatory energy efficiency standard, a lot of great solar provisions, and of course then the carbon reduction piece of it, which is kind of revolving around RGGI, but it goes further than that. I mean, for years we have tried to get any of these pieces passed as individual bills, and we've never gotten too much traction. Now we've got a bill that has all four of them in it, and that, as Rip mentioned, we are still trying to strengthen this bill. We now have help from the administration on that. I do want to mention that, because they have jumped in and helped us strengthen this. In past sessions, I would see bills get worse as the session went on, and this time I would agree with the delegates' comments that it's gotten better. So I will hand it back to our CCAN brethren, but I do want to thank those of you on the phone in your efforts over the years, not just now, but over the years, to make sure that we got better representation in Richmond, and then that we continue to put pressure on our to get the very best policy that we can through the chambers. Thanks much. Back to you, Mike.
Thank you. That was, again, Bob Shippy, who is legislative chair of the Virginia chapter of the Sierra Club, and was one of the many folks who rolled up their sleeves over many weeks and helped write the bill that is now the Virginia Clean Economy Act. And if you want to read more about the bill and fact sheets related to the bill and what other publications are saying about the bill, you can check out the blog of our next speaker, Harrison Wallace, at our website, ccanactionfund.org. It's the first blog on the page, so that's ccanactionfund.org. You'll also see there, again, at the end of Harrison's blog, a link to a fact sheet about the bill, and also posts from Blue Virginia, and a very thorough, but I think fair piece by Virginia, the Virginia Mercury, a very solid third-party review of the bill. Now I'll hand it over to Harrison Wallace himself. Harrison is Virginia State Director of CCAN and the CCAN Action Fund, and he will talk in more detail about the major pillars of the bill and ongoing measures to make the bill even stronger. Harrison.
Hey, thanks, Mike, and thank you, Delegate Sullivan and Bob, for kicking this off. I'm gonna talk a bit about the policy and go a tiny bit in the weeds. And hopefully, if you have any other questions on it, feel free to ask. I do encourage you to look at the Mercury article as well for an objective and thorough review of the bill. And like the delegate said, this bill is changing. I'm going to focus on the House bill, which is a more ambitious and vehicle that we're really excited about, and I think we are hoping to make even more improvements on next week when we're presenting those bills in crossover. So what I want to start with is the centerpiece of the bill, and I think Delegate Sullivan is a great chief patron for it, and that's energy efficiency. So the whole thing, the way we look at this whole bill is as an energy efficiency first piece of legislation. We do that through our EERS, the Energy Efficiency Resource Standard, where we'll get 5% of cumulative savings by 2025 on energy bills. So that's money going right back into your pockets. And then the SEC will approve even more savings heading into another 3-year period after that. So these savings are going to end up equaling out to $17 a month in savings on your energy bill. So we're going to talk more about cost, as I'm sure a lot of you have heard on the internet and just all over the place on this bill, a lot of different things on it. But I just want to start with how we formed this bill was to make sure that people are saving money by making energy efficiency a mandated resource through the EERS, and then also making it an energy efficiency first bill where the SEC is directed and utilities are directed to look at ways to where they can reduce demand before they try to build another gas plant or any other type of power plant in the Commonwealth. So I'm really excited about that pillar and really looking forward to making mandated savings a pillar of what Virginia does on the clean energy space. And just going back a little bit to what Bob said, in the Grid Transformation and Security Act, the only way we were able to get energy efficiency into a bill that Dominion wrote was through them spending money. This is an example of how this is a bill written by people who care about climate change and by folks who are trying to make sure the clean energy business is much more than just Dominion. And that was done through having something that they would never want in the bill, which is mandated savings instead of mandated spending. The next part that's a really important pillar of the bill is a renewable portfolio standard. So this bill will mandate that we get to 100% clean energy. The House bill has Dominion doing that by 2045, and APCO, a smaller utility in more southwest Virginia, by 2050. So complete clean energy by 2050, earlier for the millions of people in Dominion's network. And this is done through mandated build-outs of clean energy, that's wind and solar, and then just a tiered system of bringing up renewables each year that get us to that standard. And I think, the bill isn't perfect. The RPS isn't perfect. We are working to make it more perfect. But I think, as I said in my blog, this is, I think, the biggest first step I've ever seen on climate. And just to give us a little bit of a picture here, this will get us over 40% of our non-nuclear load to be clean energy. And in Maryland, where my boss Mike has been working really hard to make them a leader on climate, they passed a bill last year to get to 50% by 2030, and that was, I think, their third or fourth try on the RPS. So for us to do that in the first time with a clean energy majority is setting us up to go way past that in the future, because this is, even when we pass this, we are not done. And that kind of, that pillar gets into expanding wind and solar by mandating that as the resource of the future, so that we'll have up to 17,000 new megawatts of new wind and solar by 2035. So that'll power millions of homes and create tons of jobs in Hampton Roads with the wind array. And then the part that gets us at CCAN super excited is ending fossil fuel emissions. So building new clean energy is important. It's great. We have to have this to make sure that our grid is sustainable. But in order for us to combat climate change, we have to end the emissions. So this bill was the only bill in the General Assembly that made sure that all fossil fuel emissions are ended. And in the mandate that in the House version, that's by 2045. So eliminating fossil fuel emissions through a program that a lot of you know called RGGI is the first step. So joining RGGI to make sure we're getting 30% reductions by 2030, and then extending that out to 2045 and getting everything down to 0% emissions is an important part of this. We also got rid of biomass in the 2031 through 2045 RGGI period, so that fuel is not omitted from the carbon reduction cap. And then the other side of this is that we have mandated closures of fossil fuel plants in this bill. So Dominion's coal plants are going to be retired by 2030. So they're already not running at a high level. This will make sure they're off the grid and not polluting a lot of vulnerable communities that live near them in the next decade. And then all their gas plants have to be shut off by 2045, which is going to make it economically nearly impossible for anyone to think that they should build something that has a 30-year lifespan that has to be shut off by 2045. So that's just another way that we're making sure that the current fossil fuel emissions that are worsening climate change, now the end date, and that is all before 2050, and that the dirtiest of all of them, coal, is getting shut down over the next decade. So we're really excited about that, and just having that set is really the end of the fossil fuel industry, we believe, in Virginia. And then the other pillar that I really wanted to talk about is just how environmental justice fits into this bill. Really all over it. There's a new provision that wasn't in the introduced one that showed up in the House bill and the Senate bill, and that's the percentage of income payment plan, or PIP program. This program allows for low-income Virginians to have a capped energy bill that matches 6% of their income if it's not electric heat, 10% if it's electric heat, and provides a bit of a cushion for a lot of people who are facing really hard energy burdens, especially in the winter when it's really cold and they have to turn on their heat a whole bunch. So this can help protect people. We've seen that cities with the highest energy burdens have some of the lowest poverty rates and also some of the highest eviction rates. So by giving people a little bit of peace of mind of knowing that their energy bill won't go over a certain level. And then the great thing about this program is after a year of seeing where those folks are, we can go in and make sure that there are energy efficiency upgrades so that we're actually fixing the problem that's making them use so much energy in the first place. So really excited about that. Also, low-income people don't have to pay for some of the new projects like the wind build-out, which also is not putting a burden on them. And historically disadvantaged communities are really highlighted in this bill by especially a couple enactment clauses, making sure that there's environmental justice review every 3 years, so we see how the program is doing, if it's affecting communities, vulnerable communities, and what we can do to fix that. And the Council on Environmental Justice is collaborating on all of these as we've now codified that with a new law so that they'll be around forever. And then also there is language in here to make it the policy of the Commonwealth, so any agency that's putting together a new job training program or putting together a clean energy resource permit is looking at these frontline communities, looking at communities near coal fields, and seeing if this can benefit them and putting them first in line to get these things. And this would make it a policy to where they're going to look at them first. So those are just some of the exciting things in this bill. Obviously, I think it will get better, meaning that it can get better. And the most important part is that we're not done. This is something that I think will launch us into a new realm in kind of the ranking of clean energy states in Virginia. But we still will have more work to do, but at least now we have a lot of the infrastructure we need to be able to win this race against the climate crisis. So that is a quick synopsis of the bill, and I'm happy to answer more questions. Again, I encourage you to go and read what we wrote about it. Mike wrote a little bit more about the bill on our blog as well, and then, of course, the Mercury piece. And as Delegate Sullivan said, I really encourage you to reach out to your legislators to ask them to support it and show up in support of it at committee, especially in what looks like it'll be Monday, Senate comments and labor.
Hey, Mike, this is Rip. Let me just say that it's been a crazy session, and this bill has been my principal focus, but it's really been comforting and very helpful to always look out into the committee room and see Bob and Harrison there, ready to help us out on this bill and back me up. It's a nice feeling to see them out there all around the building helping. So I appreciate their efforts.
And Delegate Sullivan, I wonder if we could just switch to questions now from a frequently asked question. And by the way, if you want to submit your question, again, we're about to take questions. Email to us at info@ccanactionfund.org. That's info@ccanactionfund.org. But Delegate Sullivan, I think you're in the best position to answer a frequently asked question over the last few weeks, and that is, who wrote the bill? There are some folks that think that there's no way that Dominion would yield so much on renewables after a history of fighting us on renewables and being pro-coal and pro-gas, that how could a bill like this get passed unless Dominion wrote it in a way that games the ratepayers and ultimately probably hurts the environment? So you're in the best position to know, how did this bill get written?
Well, this bill, as I indicated earlier, the bill is still being written. But I think it's fair to say that this bill has been written by a coalition of environmental groups, first and foremost, that's really unprecedented in scope and depth. The Virginia Poverty Law Center's at the table, SELC's at the table, NRDC's at the table, AEEE's at the table. I've been at the table. CCAN, of course, at the table, Sierra Club at the table, LCV at the table. Just a really deep group of stakeholders that have never really been in a position to be in one room and come up with a bill. Now, coalition building is really hard, but it's gone, frankly, just remarkably well. And these are all people who all want to get to the same place. And so one thing you're not going to hear me do is take credit for drafting this bill. I've been sort of, then Senator McClellan and I, sort of at the top of the pyramid, if you will. But there have been a lot of people much smarter than I, actually, coming up with the technical details. And picking up on something that Harrison was saying, when we, I guess the word would be, presented this bill to Dominion. Now, it's not a finished product. The bill was a bill when we sort of said to Dominion, here's where we're headed. Now, Dominion recognizes that it's in a new world, and while I don't want to overplay it, it's not like Dominion is not an influential force here in Richmond any longer. It's not like they've gone away, but they know, and the story Bob told is absolutely right. 2 years ago, when we had 49 members rather than 55, is when Dominion started to see some cracks in its armor, if you will, and that vote that Bob was talking about really was remarkable. We called it the power of 49. We had 49, not quite a majority, but we were able to win a vote that frankly, Dominion had never lost a vote like that. And when we passed this out of the House, the VCEA out of the House a couple weeks ago, Dominion had never seen a bill like this pass out of the House of Delegates, and it's never seen a bill like this pass out of the Senate. So the ground has shifted under them. And so I guess what I'm suggesting to you, Mike, is that they came to this negotiating table in a much weakened position, If I can hold my 55 votes together, Senator McClellan can hold her 21 votes together. We're in a position to do things that just a year ago before the election we couldn't have dreamed of doing.
Thank you, Delegate. And our next question, this is a specific question from a listener on the phone. The question is, and I direct this to Harrison and Bob, is there any opportunity to include a meaningful fossil fuel moratorium in the VCEA? My communities are never going to support a bill which allows continued frack gas build out. So that is a question that we've heard, a version of that question we've heard frequently. I guess the question I'd have to Bob and then maybe Harrison is this bill a de facto moratorium? And is there a possibility of having a formal moratorium on fossil fuels later?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike, and I've heard that too. I think it is a de facto moratorium, and I say it for two reasons. Part of the bill, if folks have seen it, is that the administration is tasked with doing a review of capacity energy needs that will be done over the next, really, it's going to be almost 2 years away when the deadline is, I think, Harrison, correct me if I'm wrong, and no fossil fuel infrastructure can be built out in that time. And then, depending on the results of that report, there would have to be jumped through to propose any new fossil fuel infrastructure. The utilities would have to be meeting all their energy efficiency targets, their mandated renewable portfolio targets, and they'd have to be able to demonstrate that there's no other way to meet the capacity but for the new fossil structure. And even then, they would have to meet, as Harrison alluded to a minute ago, sort of the cost-benefit analysis of doing that when they know it would be phased out within, say, 20 years hence. I think that common would make it virtually impossible to justify any new fossil fuel plants.
Mike, this is Rick. Let me just say,
go ahead.
I think that with the beauty of the VCA, one of the beauties of the VCA, and I think this is what Bob was getting at, is that it shifts the market forces within Virginia. And he's right about the sort of the initial couple of years where there is essentially a moratorium because of the way the bill is drafted. And what it does is it changes all the economics of energy in Virginia over the course of the next 30 years. And as a practical economic matter, it will no longer be possible to profitably build a fossil fuel plant in Virginia. And the way the market will be shifted by this transformative bill will force any profit-making entity to be looking at renewable ways to produce energy rather than fossil fuel ways.
Thank you, Delegate. And we have tons of questions, and so I'm just going to shift gears and direct this question to you, Harrison. I think it's a good question. The question is, as Delegate Sullivan noted, the bill is changing, but he believes the bill is getting better. Can he or others explain what positive changes are being made right now? And are there any ways in which the bill is not improving? Harrison?
Sure. The main way that the bill is changing in a positive way right now is that we are continuing to see more and more oversight from the SEC getting inserted into the bill, and just in general, just more ways to make sure that this is the most responsible way to build clean energy. I think that's what we've all been working towards, and now especially with the administration leaning in a little bit more, we're starting to see. And then just from the House version, there was another actual moratorium enactment clause added in there if people aren't meeting their RGGI goals by 2028, and then more worker provisions for local workers to be included in any future build outs of new fossil fuel. No new fossil fuels, new clean energy, and especially new offshore wind. So those are some of the ways I think it's getting better. I haven't seen how it's gotten worse. I think what we'll just have to watch out for is that, of course, Dominion isn't liking a lot of these changes, and we'll try to fight them. So I think making sure that there are people standing up in support of them and giving, brave legislators like Delegate Sullivan the opportunity to support it and know that they have some backup.
And great, thank you, Harrison. And Delegate Sullivan, we've got several versions of the same question, and that is, you've said that the bill is not perfect. There are a lot of positive features, but if the bill is imperfect, will the Virginia General Assembly be able to come back in subsequent years and improve this bill, or in a regulated market, is Dominion likely to dominate and control any imperfections going forward at the expense of ratepayers?
The answer to the latter question is no, and the answer to the first question is yes. The first thing you learn when you come to Richmond is sometimes even the best ideas take a little time to marinate. I can't remember whether it was Bob or Harrison who pointed out that one of the things that's been unique about the VCEA is sort of the speed with which we've been able to get to this point. But I have a saying when it comes to a bill that either fails or a bill that isn't quite as good as you want. I always tell people, this is why God invented next year. We will be back. If there are things we don't get in this bill that we want to continue to work on, we can come back next year. There's certainly nothing in the bill that says this is now set in stone for the next 30 years. In fact, I would imagine that it will continue to get worked on. None of us know what kind of technology might exist 5 or 10 years from now. So we will have an annual possibility to come back and tweak or even make major changes to the bill. So when I say it's imperfect, I am sort of comforted by the fact that yes, we'll always be able to come back and keep at it. I mean, I see frankly one of my roles here in this job and I have since I got here 6 or 7 years ago, to be poking and prodding, Dominion, APCO, and everyone else, and just pushing, be an agent of change, and just keep pushing. And that we're not going to pass this bill and stop. We're not going to pass this bill and stop. And one thing I haven't heard anyone talk about, and I think is particularly exciting, and is one of those things we're going to keep, we can kind of keep cranking, is that there are actually rules built into this bill that require competition finally coming to Virginia. One of the, a lot of the folks at the table are companies that are dying to come to Virginia and really ignite our solar industry. But right now, the way things work, they really can. And there are requirements as we move toward renewables here in Virginia that 35% of the power being produced can be produced by entities other than Dominion. So we're going to have new players coming into the market in Virginia, and you can be sure that as they start to be successful, they're going to continue to press to do more and more. So as I said earlier, I think a big part of what I see the VCEA doing is unleashing market forces that right now are stifled. And if we can start to unleash those forces, frankly, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I think we can do this even faster than 2045. None of the bill says we can't go faster than 2045. It just sets very strict, deadlines by which it must happen.
Well, here's a question. We have a couple of questions on this. We've gotten a lot of questions, and I'm trying to group some of them together. I would pose this to you, Bob, with maybe help from Harrison. I'll read the first sentence of one question and then paraphrase several others. The assertion from one of the callers that any real change in Virginia requires a change in the monopoly rules in central generation. In other words, until we deregulate the electricity grid dominated by Dominion, will we ever have a just and clean system? So, Bob, do you agree that the system needs to be deregulated, or are we proving in Virginia that you can move toward clean, affordable energy even with a regulated monopoly like Dominion?
Well, that is a fantastic question, and Sierra Club has frankly kind of weighed that one over the years. And you see bills even in this session that take a look at the monopoly and the regulatory framework, and I think we're of improving it. But I think what at least the chapter, just as we've weighed this over the past several months, what we've come to is the conclusion that we have the regulatory framework we have now. Let's optimize it and the SCC oversight. I think Harrison mentioned this in his talk because that has been neutered over the past several years, and it's important to have real regulation. And I think if we do that, and with many of the provisions that Delegate Sullivan was talking about in terms of mandating, competition, especially in the solar space, but even a little bit in the wind space, that is not something we've seen before. I think that's really worth a try. And of course, if that, if it doesn't work out, we can look at the regulatory framework. But I think a realistic Virginia right now would lead us to that conclusion that let's make the framework work better for Virginians versus trying to undo it, which I don't think would have a lot of support in the GA today anyway.
Harrison, here's a question I'll direct to you, and maybe Delegate Sullivan, you can add a response. The question is literally, both the State Corporation Commission and the Virginia Attorney General have stated this bill is bad for consumers. What's your response, Harrison?
So, my response is that with, they were looking at the Senate bill, so adding this stronger ERS neuters a bit of what the SEC said. $17 a month saved really brings down that number that they threw out there, $23 a month by 2027, an increased cost. Also with the SEC, they said that Reggie was going to cost $12 a month just last year, and now they've dropped that down to under $2. So again, it's like until something happens, what they want to do is say, that's going to cost too much, because that's their job, is to try to warn us away from investing in too many new things, even though we have a climate crisis to deal with. And the Attorney General's estimate on wind, we're continuing to try to improve that bill and improve that part of what is happening in the Commonwealth around the new wind generation that's going to be coming off our coast. The bill does have more competitive procurement, and as they mentioned, those costs are a worst-case scenario. I think it's going to be a lot cheaper by the time those turbines go in the water in a few years, and this allows for a competitive process and a cost cap from keeping it from getting to be way overblown. And in this bill, we also got rid of the basis point adder for wind, which was just an extra bonus that Dominion didn't need, which can save $1 billion on those costs. So those are just a few ways that we're trying to make sure that we're dealing with that. And then, again, hopefully in the future version of this bill, and with you all's help in pushing for more action to protect ratepayers, we'll see even more SEC oversight.
Yeah, Mike, this is Rip. Let me make, I think, 3 points. One, I think Harrison was describing earlier the PIP program with a lot of protections in here for particularly low income Virginians. Second, one of the things that I happen to think is one of the most important parts of this bill, it doesn't get a lot of pub, is that we are writing into code that the FCC, as it oversees this transition, is now required by the General Assembly to consider the social costs of carbon as it as it helps shape this program going forward. That's never, the SEC usually has these blinders on and, just looks at, cost to produce, what's happening to the rates. So, and that's sort of related to my third point. That, a similar question was asked when the SEC came in and gave some testimony about the cost of this. And one of my colleagues leaned into his microphone and asked, well, what's the cost of doing nothing? And that's sort of where we are, right? We are, this existential crisis we're facing is not to say that we should raise everyone's rates and bills in order to solve it, but there are going to be some costs associated with it. We happen to think they're going to be a lot less than some of the naysayers are saying. I've spent a lot of time with the people in the wind space and what's happening all around the world in terms of the cost of wind coming down is really dramatic. It's like we see in so many industries. It's expensive at first and then it comes down. Look at solar, right? Solar now versus solar 10 years ago is dramatically reduced. So we are very mindful of the ratepayer in this bill, both frankly across the spectrum and certainly at the lower socioeconomic part of the spectrum, and really confident that in the final analysis this is going to be something that saves people money, and obviously at the same time it's going to help us save the planet. Mike, let me ask you, I'm running out of time here. If you could maybe give me one last question. I've sort of got to run. Is there something that a bunch of people have asked that maybe I can answer?
Yeah, we have about 50 questions saying, why are you such a tremendously great legislator, Delegate Sullivan? Well, I'll tell you one question that comes up a lot, and maybe you can answer it and along with your friends on this panel. But how does the Virginia Clean Economy Act affect the Mountain Valley Pipeline and the Atlantic Coast Pipeline for fracked gas? Does the Clean Economy Act restrict them or sunset them in any way, or does it in any way grandfather them in, exempting them from regulation?
The answer
a lot of people concerned about the pipelines.
Yeah. The answer is no. It doesn't exempt them at all. My answer to that, and then I'll let Harrison and Bob chime in, is sort of a return to what I was saying before. We are changing the economics of energy in Virginia, and if you could fast forward to 2050 now, we can't see 2050 yet, but if we could, the plan, what we're trying to put in place is an economy that's not going to need and will not going to need, and B, would make pipelines like Mountain Valley and Atlantic Coast Pipeline uneconomic to build. And frankly, I think the economics of those pipelines is disintegrating before Dominion's eyes.
Great. Well, Delegate Sullivan, we will let you go. Harrison and Bob, if y'all could hang on for a couple more questions. But Delegate Rip Sullivan, Chief Patron of the Virginia Clean Economy Act, Chair of the Labor and Commerce Committee, Chair of the Democratic Caucus in the House, thank you for all the time that you have put into this bill, for your legacy of fighting climate change, and for all the future victories we'll have in other parts of the economy in solving climate change. Thank you so much for your help.
Well, thank you, Mike and Bob and Harrison. It's been great being with you, and for everyone on the phone, thank you. This is a team game. I'm pleased to be here and happy to do what I'm doing, but this just doesn't work without, as I said earlier, an entire state or even beyond the borders of our state. I know everyone on this line is trying to get us to the same place, and I'm grateful for everyone's help. Bear down and focus for another week and a half, and I'm really optimistic that we can make this happen. So not time that we can't celebrate yet. So keep those calls and letters and emails coming.
Thank you so much, Delegate.
Great being with you. Thanks very much for the invitation.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Harrison and Bob, we have a number of questions about the issue of biomass. I want to read part of one question. It says, the Virginia Grassroots Coalition applauds your Herculean efforts to negotiate this bill. It includes many great items. However, we are concerned about newly added provisions to the engrossed bills that grant millions of dollars of ratepayer subsidies annually to biomass-fired industrial facilities, 4 paper mills owned by WestrockWorks and 1 by International Paper. These companies, and only these companies, can profit from burning biomass under the VCEA's RPS requirements. Does this questioner have it right? What sort of limitations and features are applied to the issue of biomass under this bill? Harrison, why don't you go first?
So what I'll say is that we're shutting down every Dominion biomass plant by 2028. Existing biomass does have a role in the RPS. It is a shrinking role, and one that I think, especially once we get to the point to where RGGI starts covering biomass, will just shrink more and more each year, because again, we're not letting anything new in. There's nothing coming in from out of state in this RPS. But the stuff that is already in the state as of this year has a small role that is slowly getting constrained by all the other market forces that come into reducing carbon, which biomass does produce. And I guess the only other thing I really add to it is that I think it'll take us a few years to get to the point to where New York, California, and some other like huge leaders on climate are, as all of them had to take those steps too. But as we're seeing, I think even in Maryland, where they're carving out anything left in their RPS is bad, there's a place for us to make sure that this stuff goes away. We're committed to fighting it, and we made sure in this bill that we're not incentivizing anything new or anything from out of this state that falls into that category, being a part of our clean energy future.
Yeah, this is Bob. Harrison has it exactly right, and I just want to underline the point that we're putting these companies out of business, and that's hard to put into legislation, right? I mean, they have a lot more lobbyists than we have, with Harrison and me and a merry band of nonprofit lobbyists that are in that building, and it's just miraculous, in my opinion, that we've actually been able to phase out all of those companies from doing business in Virginia over a fairly short number of years, despite their lot. Look at it both ways. That yes, there's an allowance for a certain period of time for these companies, but I look at it the other way. It says, we have negotiated basically an end to these businesses in business-friendly Virginia in the name of clean energy. So, I think it's that particular piece of the bill. I actually think is a very good compromise.
Great, and I will say that we are now at 9 o'clock, and we have not been able to get to everyone's questions, but I hope listeners will agree with us that we presented tough questions that go to the heart of some of the criticism of the bill, as well as some of the praise, that we've tried to address some of the major issues related to the bill in terms of ratepayer protections, in terms of the MVP and ACP pipelines, in terms of moratorium, in terms of the RPS and biomass. We have tried to candidly and truthfully and honestly, as advocates, talk about the features of the bill, which are overwhelmingly positive. Again, you can learn more at CCANactionfund.org. Read a thoughtful blog post by Harrison Wallace that describes the Virginia Clean Economy Act, as well as some of the features of the Green New Deal. and that we are moving forward with a good bill that will not be perfect, but will be a game changer, as Delegate Sullivan said, and that we fully intend in 2021 and 2022, and for as long as it takes, to come back year after year and improve features of the bill, expand the reach of clean energy in Virginia to cover transportation and degasifying buildings and all the things we know we need to do. But as we like to say, as part of this coalition in the Clean Energy Economy Initiative, to win the race, you need a vehicle. And this is an incredible initial vehicle. As Harrison said, this is the best first step that any state in America has taken on climate change. I can say that, Mike Tidwell, Regional Director of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, I can say that because I've worked on campaigns in Maryland, in D.C., and on Capitol Hill, and I am in touch with state and regional directors across the country in California, Washington State, New York State, and no state, no blue state that has gotten out of the block ahead of Virginia has ever passed a first omnibus bill to get into the race as strong as the Clean Economy Act. And again, I hope that if you're a supporter, you'll continue to support, you'll continue to call and email your legislators. There will be additional email alerts going out from League of Conservation Voters, Virginia Conservation Network, CCAN, Sierra Club, all these mini groups that support the bill. We will keep you updated on what you can do to make your voice heard to support the bill. And if you come to this call skeptical about the bill, I hope that you will consider how head-on we've addressed some of the criticisms and how Harrison and Delegate Sullivan and Bob Shippy of Sierra Club have had thoughtful answers to all the questions. We have not been able to get to all the questions, but we have gotten to the major themes of most of the questions. And I hope that you'll contemplate the answers. Feel free to email us at ccanactionfund.org or info@ccanactionfund.org. If we weren't able to get to your question, we'd be happy to provide a written answer as best we can. And we want to thank you for your time, all of you who've called in from all over the state, and we look forward to working with you moving forward. Thank you, Harrison. Thank you, Bob. And everyone, have a great evening. Good night.
Thank you.